Hello and welcome to Library Drawing Party. Today we're going to be drawing these beautiful tiger lilies. Today we're going to be experimenting with watercolor pencils. I introduced them last time in my video. If you don't have watercolor pencils at home, you can do our usual watercolor base and then add color pencils on top. But I wanted to show you some of the advantages of the watercolor pencils for something like these tiger lilies. So to get started, let's start with the flower pistil. I'm going to start with the central flower here, and it's slightly off center. So I'm going to be drawing the pistil, or the place that gets pollinated. So I'm using my yellow color pencil and I'm drawing in the center too. So it's the pistil and the beginning of the flower petals also have some yellow. So I'm going to be highlighting that here. And then what I found really nice about these watercolor pencils is that you can blend really easily. So I'm going to be using an orange red. And this particular variety of tiger lilies has a white stripe in the center of the flower petals. So we're going to want to be mindful of leaving a white stripe as we're drawing this. So I did 2 half circles, and then the flower petal is kind of curling under, so I have a sort of a straight edge there. Same sort of thing for this one. We just want to make sure we're not coloring over the yellow too much. And every flower in nature is going to look a little different. So it's good for each petal will have a little bit of a different marking. I'm drawing the outline of each petal, including the white stripe, and then I'm filling it in with this orange red. I don't want to fill it in all the way because we do want to layer colors on top, but I want to get enough that the color is starting to show. This petal is interesting. So it almost looks like a figure 8 or an hourglass shape, because there's a circular piece here and a circular piece here that are connected, whereas the other ones are mostly half circles. And then we have one petal over here. Okay, and what makes these tiger lilies is this beautiful orange color. So let's use our orange to start blending colors in. I started with the red orange, so that it really makes a nice vibrant and deep orange. And if you're just using colored pencils at home, it's really important that at this point you start to blend the colors together really well, because you want this to be pretty smooth since the flowers are very smooth. Once you have your basic colors established, then we can start to add in some shading and some darker notes. So the tips of the pistils is this very dark brown. I'm going to start adding that in to the lines that we started with. I'm also going to add in some shadow, really establish these lines. And there's some shadow at the base, inside of the flower. I'm going to take my regular red, some deeper red than the orange red that we were using. And I'm going to add that to the center of the flower, which adds some shading, and it keeps the colors very vibrant and bright. And then there's some on the edge too, not as much. Just a little. Then I'm going to take my brown, my light brown, and add in a bit more shading right where I was adding in the red. This will, again, bring out that orange color that we're striving for. Now, if you're working with colored pencils, you can stop here, but if you're lucky enough to have watercolor pencils, if you add a little water, the colors will start to blend together, which gives it this really smooth texture. And you're losing the texture of the paper or the grain of the paper with the addition of the water. You want to be careful though that you don't add so much water that the colors start to bleed in places that you don't want them to go. This is really just to smooth everything. But you may want the texture of the paper, so you might want to skip this step. Especially if you're working with a different kind of flower that has a lot of texture, you might not want it to be smooth. The other good thing about the watercolor pencils is that I was able to paint this flower, but the rest of my page is still dry, so I can continue working without needing to stop. So let's work on this flower next. So we're going to use the same techniques. So I'm going to use, actually let's start with the orange brown, because I want to place the petals first. So I'm working on this petal right here, so we have a nice half circle that meets up with the two flower petals. And then this petal touches the other petal. And I'm just drawing the outlines of the flower petals right now so I can have a sense of where it is in space in relationship to the other flower. Some of the flowers petals like this one will have a point and others will be curled over so you won't see the point. They still have a point, you just won't be able to see it the way that the flower petal is turning. Okay, once we have our outline established, then let's go in and add our pistil. So I'm going to take my yellow, and then I'm going to add in the yellow highlights in the center. I'm going to go back and use that orange, red orange. And you want to, again, make sure that you're keeping that white stripe intact. Now, for those of you who are working with watercolors and establishing a watercolor base, I would do the same principle here. So I would use yellow for the center and then a darker orange or mix red and orange together to establish your base coat. And then you go over it with colored pencils to get your highlights, your shadows, and just your general texture. Take my orange, start to blend it together. Once you have your colors pretty well blended, you can add a little orange to the pistil. Now let's take our dark brown and add the tips of the pistil. And let's add in a bit of shading. And then let's add in some shadow in the center. Let's take our lighter brown and blend that out a bit. Starting to lose the yellow color, so I'm going to add in some more yellow. So we want this to really pop. And let's take our red and add in some shading. And some in the petals. Our light source is coming from above, so you can put in a little extra shadow underneath. And since these flowers are outside, there's going to be other sources of light in different directions. So we don't need to concentrate the shadows as much. They can be a little bit more spread out than if we were using, say, like a spotlight. I'm going to put in a bit of brown, light brown. We want to make sure we don't lose that beautiful orange color. Now if you're working with colored pencils, you can stop here. You're going to want to make sure it's really nice and blended. But if you do have the watercolor pencils, this is when you can add in your water. Again, you want to keep the brush pretty controlled, so you want it to be a little bit dry, just wet enough that you can blend the colors together. And I'm still keeping away from that white strip. You can paint over it a little bit, but we want to really keep that as bright as we can. And there's our second flower. Now for the third flower, since it's a little bit further in the background, we're going to want the flower to be a little bit smaller than the two that we just worked on. So let's take our red orange and start to outline the flower petals. So we have one that's touching this top petal on our first flower. And you can see the point of the flower petal here. And then we have petal right next to it. The outline, it almost looks like a crab claw. And we have another petal. And there's one coming over here. And some are going off the page. So let's work on these. I'm going to put in my white strip and then color in the rest. This one I did backwards, so I did my red orange first, and now I'm adding in my yellow, and you can do that with all of them as long as you make sure that you save some space for the yellow. And the pistils are getting cut off the page, so I'm just gonna hint at them here. I'm using my light brown, adding in some more color, shadow. I take my orange, start to blend the colors together. Take my red, add in a bit of a highlight. And my dark brown and a little shadow. And then I'll paint this with my water. Once you have your flowers drawn, then let's add in the stems. So I'm going to be taking my green And I'm going to be drawing in some stems. Now, a lot of the stems are going to be getting cut off from view because of the flower petals, but we just want to hint that they're there. This will help ground the tiger lilies in the drawing. Now, you can see there is this yellow flower that was growing with it. So let's add in some yellow buds. And we don't need this to be as detailed because we want the focus to be on the tiger lilies. But it also adds a nice pop of color. Okay, now the yellow flower was growing on stems that seem to have purple flowers, which is also great as purple and yellow are complementary colors. I'm going to be drawing in some leaves and some stems for these flowers with the purple. And again, you don't want this to be too detailed because it'll distract from our tiger lilies. But it adds more dimension to the drawing and helps keep the eye moving around. These are very small, almost dainty flowers. So we want to keep the stems and the leaves small so that they can handle the flowers. And then let's take our dark green and add in some dark green. As you can see, I'm being pretty loose with my strokes. It's similar to our abstract art that we worked on last week. That's what's great about art, is that you can combine many different styles. So we have our realistic flowers, and then these are more abstract, more subjective. But adding some nice texture and nice contrast to the smoothness of the flower petals. I'm adding in some light green now. And then there was a big leaf here. Probably from the tiger lilies. You want to mimic the way that the leaf would be. So there would be the central stem in the middle, and then the veins would be going out to the side and diagonal lines. So you're going to want to do that so it goes this way and then it goes down. And I use my light green to blend it. And I'll add in a bit of that purple. Help tie it in with the rest. Now up here, I'm going to use my red. This reminds me of a coxcomb flowers. Have a lot of texture. And then I'm going to add in that purple. And some green. Some darker green. I'll add in some texture for some leaves that might be getting cut off, and stems, other plants that are coexisting in this environment. Use my red and create another flower down here. Just hint at it. And then in the corner here, there was some flowers. Were like these long rectangles with some green. Add that in and darken the purple a bit. And then at this point, we can add in some blue for the background. Symbolize the sky. You can also use dark green for this if you're envisioning it in a lush flower bed, or even brown for the soil. You can also use watercolors for this. I just want to smooth some of that sky out and some of the leaves and stems. I don't want to lose all the texture, because that's what's keeping them different from the tiger lily flower petals. And there you have it. That's our tiger lily. Thank you for joining us in this week's library drawing party. We hope to see you again next week. We have library drawing parties every Wednesday at 7 p.m. and keep being creative.